Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and I am so excited that for the first time ever, we have a repeat guest. Bill Simon is back in the house.
Giddy up.
Yep, giddy up. And Bill Simon has a very impressive bio, which I'm not going to read per his request, but I would recommend that you all go back and listen to episodes 17 and 18, which was our first two-part interview.
Correct.
And in his bio, I may or may not have accidentally referred to his employer as McCormick's. It is McCormick, and Bill is the Group Vice President of Sales for North America at McCormick. So he's a big deal. Go back and listen to those episodes, but I'm so excited that you're back.
Small deal, but I'm back.
Big deal. And he drives really far to be here, which is another
thank you
big
for that.
deal.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I feel like when we were having our first conversation, we kind of planned mid-conversation for you to return.
Well, you did. You seeded that, and then, you basically made it a commitment, I think, shortly after the podcast was over.
Yeah, like you promised on air that
you
would come back.
I did. And you're relentless, so that's good. So we're here, and we're getting after it.
But you're a fan favorite, so I'm really excited to have you back. And
I really appreciate it. It's very humbling, and the feedback from the first one was really, really cool.
Oh my gosh, that was so fun for me just to watch so many people saying such nice things about you.
Yeah, and you affording me the opportunity to just share was really cool. So I got some really, really great messages from folks that I hadn't talked to in a long time. So if it can help, my view of this is if it helps one person, then it's absolutely worth the time, right? So appreciate this in a big way. Yeah.
So it has been almost a year since you were in the studio.
Yeah.
Catch us up. Like, what's been going on with you? What's new? What's hot for you right now?
Yeah, so it's a pretty vibrant space right now, right? So from a company perspective, what I would say is still rocking and rolling at McCormick, so I still have the same accountability. So that has not changed. But boy, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, a ton of leadership changes within my specific team.
Okay.
And so there's a really, it's really exciting, and there's some lessons learned as it relates to that, and we can certainly unpack that a little bit. The business went through, much like many in the industry, a lot of challenges. So the things that you see in the popular press that are really well documented on things like Google and Twitter and all the unfortunate events with people. We experienced that too. Many of our peers went through that optimization too. And it just is a byproduct of post-COVID, getting your cost structure right. And unfortunately, at times that involves people. I think McCormick does that really carefully and really thoughtfully. But unfortunately, we had one of those since we last met. So I can certainly share some perspective there on how to, how we did it, what we learned. From a business perspective, I'm still super excited about the company's journey. Last year was the toughest year from a performance perspective, but probably one of the proudest years that I had. And it really demonstrated agility, creativity, persistence as it relates to, broader economic hardship and macro factors that aren't within your control. But how do you respond, right? Are you a byproduct of that? Or are you going to lean in and try to change that agenda? And I'm blessed with not only my team, but also some really skilled cross-functional partners that have also come together in that brief period of time. Like we have a new CFO, and if he probably won't listen, who works with me on the CPD business. His name's Ryan. He's also a fellow. He's very passionate about sweet goods and baked goods, so we have a kindred spirit.
I like this CFO of yours.
The CFO is very talented, and we're also blessed with a really talented marketing leader, Nikki, and her leadership team. And I really feel like we've come together even closer. I know it sounds really cliche, but we almost had to out of necessity, right?
Well, I think sometimes it is those hard times, though, where you do form some pretty unbreakable bonds with people, and you do sometimes emerge stronger if you can get through it the right way together. Yeah,
and I think the first part of COVID, agree 100%. The first part of COVID was all about supply chain, and that forged partnerships that I had never had. Right. Never at McCormick. And I think, Mark, who will never listen to this podcast, who's my fellow New Jersey guy, is just a really skilled leader in supply chain, really commercially grounded. Nice. And we never had the partnership that we had pre-COVID. But what we faced last year that was, kind of emerging when we had the podcast, but we thought it was going to be really temporary, and it wasn't, unfortunately, like inflation, supply issues, right? private label really a byproduct of inflation and just how tough of a spot consumers were in and still are, right? So we had, what I've told my team is, and also leadership to a certain degree, like never before had we had, more than one of these things, and we had 4 really meaningful changes all collide within one fiscal year. And so it made for really tough results. So how do you navigate that productively with people?
Yes.
How do you be forthright, transparent at the same time that you're evoking confidence that we've got this? At the time when results are not where you want them to be, but you're like, look, we're going to pivot and here's where we're going to go. And that's what I'm most proud of, frankly, is for myself too. I learned a lot. I had to rethink things that I staunchly disagreed with.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, like what?
I have a tremendous passion for revenue growth management, which we talked a little bit about before. It's a capability that we've got really skilled folks, and now we've got a new leader that's running that. I finally shed it. So that's another journey that we can talk about. Like that was my baby, and Patrick leads that, but now Diana leads that.
Okay.
And these folks are really, really wicked smart. And, it was very clear that the consumer and the market was moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Meaning, this I don't want to get too technical, but something that was really unresponsive to pricing all of a sudden became remarkably responsive to pricing. Meaning, like you as a consumer were acutely aware of things at McCormick and what you were paying.
Yes.
And that's usually true for eggs and cheese and milk and butter and even carbonated soft drinks, things that are high purchase frequency, but not spice. Because you're not buying that frequently, so you're not as aware.
I think the only thing I pay attention to are cinnamon sticks.
I appreciate
and
that.
Vanilla bean.
And hopefully McCormick.
Of course.
So this stuff moved really fast. And so now you're faced with, you have to reinvest, you have to consider pricing strategies, giving back on price, which I mean, that is a very unique place to be. And how do you do that with customers and do it productively and thoughtfully? And while I've done some of that, not to the degree that we just did in the last 12 months. I mean, we moved fast on investments for us that would be small for some companies, but for us were large. Like these were, $10, $20 million decisions of investment or spend back on a business that, in terms of size and scale, that would be material. Like that's a material, like that's got to go to leadership. That's got to get CEO alignment.
Impact.
Like what are we doing here? Like exactly what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
And convincing them to pivot down a path that perhaps isn't innate to how they think about the business either. So,
right, especially if this is stuff that they've not had to think about before or deal with before. And then suddenly included. It's like, we got to make some quick decisions here that are pretty significant decisions.
And counter to how the growth algorithm has performed for decades, right? So I give a lot of credit to the research teams, the insights teams, the rev team, the revenue management team, pardon me, and having the courage to bring it forward, really, and I think just also the agility of marketing, finance, sales to rally around something that was going to be very uncomfortable to execute, and we did it so fast. We also launched, and this is more of a testament to marketing, we launched a brand new series of offerings to kind of offer an accessible brand for consumers on the spice business, and we did it in like 10 weeks.
Jeez.
Most of our stuff takes 18 months to get out the door. Wow. Like that, the sauce that I gave you as part of our visit, that took about 14 months to commercialize. This happened all in 10 weeks.
And what's the need to accelerate it to that extent?
The acute need on the business, right? Okay. So it's like, look, again, not to get too technical, but there were, price gaps that were too wide for us to navigate productively with the existing suite of brands that we had. Okay. And it's like, okay, what do we do?
So like, that's not going to move the needle. We have to do something different.
We've got to do something different, and we need to think about it. Because the other risk is you denigrate the value of that brand to the point where if you discount it too far, how do you ever go back?
Well, yeah.
Right? And it's spent years, validating that it can command this price.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of debate, appropriately so, and a lot of insight that has to go into that consumer, customer, and just raw analytics that forge those decisions. So again, proud moment. The company had never. I had not seen that done at McCormick, and frankly, I really had not seen that done at Heinz prior either. So it was one of those rally cries, like good for them, like they heard it. And when I say them, I'm talking about product development, I'm talking about
Yeah.
marketing, I'm talking about, parts of my team, to pull that off and to get early, like we had to go quickly with
Yeah.
customers faster than we ever went, and we got customer acceptance, which was really exciting and invigorating. And now
That's
it's rolling.
awesome.
Yeah. So there's good that comes from
Yeah.
crisis, which we talked
Yeah.
about before. And this, in my mind, this wasn't necessarily like full on crisis. It wasn't like the P&L was falling apart, but it was
Right.
definitely a time where we had to pivot pretty quickly to change the trajectory of the business.
Yeah. Can I ask a super tactical question?
Yeah, sure.
Because this is something that I see coming up a lot where people have ideas, but maybe lack the ability to influence those ideas.
Yeah.
Any tips, ideas, thoughts that you can share on, obviously there were many of you that kind of knew this is the direction we need to go in, but then you had to likely get approval from
Correct.
somebody to
Yeah.
go that direction. How did you influence that decision?
I don't necessarily know if there's any, massive unlock. What I would say, a testament to McCormick and their leadership, we have a growth agenda that's in our releases that we just presented to the analysts in New York, and we really focus in on an agenda that differentiates us, we believe, from others in terms of the promise on growth and top line.
Gotcha.
So anything that undermines that affords you the opportunity to have a conversation with leadership, unlike many places that I've ever seen. So the accessibility and the lack of formality in some instances, not
Yeah.
all, but in
Yeah.
some, affords the opportunity to really raise up issues quickly.
Nice.
My boss is really adept at that. I believe, he's a huge advocate not only for the business, but also for the functions that have to do this heavy lifting. And he has a tremendous amount of empathy, but he also demonstrates consistently the ability to knock down barriers.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's one individual. I think it's more of it's systemic. It's part of our culture.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? So it's like, look, I want to know what bad news you're facing and or
Yes.
opportunities or issues. And it can come from the lowest of levels. Like we just had an experience this week. I mean, if I were to reflect on it, where someone very low in the organization presented insights that I had not seen. And I'm like, we got to mobilize against this like right now. We had a meeting within 30 minutes.
Wow.
Myself, Nikki, Ryan, marketing and finance. And we agreed right there, we're going to mobilize. We're going to mobilize in 2 weeks. I mean, that just doesn't happen if you don't have the right, and then that also spans back to, do you have the degrees of freedom? Do you have the
Yes.
advocacy?
Yes.
Right? Do you have the ability to, do you have the ownership?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, to me, my version and interpretation of it is that you've got people that recognize we know directionally where we're supposed to be.
Correct.
We've identified a gap or something that's taking us off course,
Right.
and we want to talk about our ideas for getting us back where we need to be. And
Yeah.
that sounds really simple, but it's actually, I think, really hard in organizations to message, especially all the way down, because you said like whatever level, all the way to the lowest levels of the organization. I think sometimes people struggle with really understanding what are our commitments, what are our goals, what are we trying to drive towards.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't want to profess, because anyone listening to this would say, I can give you 10 examples where that didn't work. I would say, again, where it intersects with really critical issues. I do feel like, and in fact, the gentleman that I was talking to you about right before we went live, who's retiring, he retired after 35 years, he said, McCormick is at its best in a crisis. It knows how to rally in a crisis, which is true. And I've seen it. And again, sometimes those crises, if you will, are small in the grand scheme of the business, but large in terms of strategic significance. Like anything on spice is going to garner the appropriate attention from the broader organization. And that's where you saw some of that come to light. We are still a big organization. We still have, broad processes. We tend to be conservative financially. So there are times when I would say speed isn't our friend. But in that example, and again, I think with the appropriate education, insight, and then subsequently the advocacy and the notion of and the degrees to fail and or lean in together, it's really invigorating. It's not perfect, but I'm really proud of what the organization was able to accomplish. We're still not done, but those are some of the things that transpired in the last, since the last time we got together. I mean, it was a tough year. It was a really tough year. I think, the other thing, that I would just reflect back on is, as we were going through that, I kept saying to my leadership and then ultimately my team, the fundamentals of what we can control are still really sound. Okay. And the fact that this is not coming together is not necessarily a reflection of effort and or the results that will underwrite our success in the future. But how do you bridge, this is going to be a really cruddy bonus year. This is going to be a really cruddy earnings report.
Yes.
There's going to be, concern and duress, and consequence.
Yes.
But at the same time, people don't lose sight of the fact that the fundamentals are still solid.
Yeah.
Right. And there was great work that we are now benefiting from right now. Like we just had our first quarter and it was really strong, thankfully. Right. And so we got a little bit of a bounce first step. We got to string 3 more together. But, the proof is in the execution from those that are ultimately responsible, those that are, up against the accounts and ultimately up against the brands that we try to steward.
And that takes time. I would love to hear your perspective because I know, unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations that are not having the greatest year right now and having to figure out what is that right balance of sharing the right amount of information, not too much information. I mean, and I'd love to hear your perspective and opinion on how to effectively communicate to people what is going on to try to give them maybe comfort or security where you can, but recognize none of us have a crystal ball. So, I mean, we're trying to put things in place, but we're not quite sure what's going to transpire. And all the while trying to keep people motivated, engaged. I think a lot of times there's these rally cries of like, please hang in there with us. Yeah. And I think
I don't know if they ever work.
No, I don't feel like they do. And I think the other challenge is people are sometimes willing to go through those battles if they feel like they know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And oftentimes what I see is that light is a lot further away than what people initially anticipate. So they say like, I think it's just going to be a bad quarter. And then it turns into a bad 2 quarters and 3 quarters and 4 quarters. So how have you messaged that? And I guess, because I know this is not your first rodeo with this. So, what have you learned along the way too, that maybe you could share with others to kind of help? Because I see a lot, I can give a lot of examples of it not being done well. I'd like to
me too. Me too. And
how to do it.
I give our leadership team a lot of credit for this round. I wouldn't say that's true from previous efforts, but the degree of transparency from our CEO on, look, here's what we're facing, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it the McCormick way, and people know what that means. Anyone that's been there for a year or more kind of knows what the culture stands for, and we do have a people component that we talked about before. That's I believe it's rich, it's thoughtful, it's not perfect, just like any strategy. It's got some vulnerabilities, but he was very forthright on here's the message track. Very forthright on bonus, on the need to right size force. We launched a voluntary retirement program. That was the first step, but he came out almost as soon as that was announced and said that may not be sufficient. So for me, it's how do you treat people like adults at the same time that you keep them focused?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, what I've always said to folks is this, a couple things that I say, and I have said on my, I've got monthly, webcasts with my leadership team to the broader organization where we try to unpack the business, what's happening. It was typically service oriented and COVID related, but we also try to unpack like, hey, here's the people agenda. Here's what's happening on bonus or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So what I've always said is, look, this could happen at any point in time. I view myself as being under a kind of a daily, quarterly, monthly contract. The company decides to employ me, and every asset, including employee assets, are at the discretion of the company and what the company can ultimately afford.
Right.
I know that's incredibly transactional, but you almost have to desensitize yourself a little bit. The human disruption is the hardest part, of course.
Yes.
I think the other thing that I try to reinforce, because I've seen different models, I've seen very insensitive and very transactional models that dehumanize what is happening. And that is not McCormick. So I try to juxtapose, look, we're going to have to make tough choices, but we are going to attempt to minimize the human disruption as much as possible. And that is the direction of leadership. That has always been my philosophy. Like, hey, why take anyone you don't want to do it to anybody. Like as soon as it's one, I said this on the webcast recently. I said as soon as it's one person, it's one too many.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, it's highly likely.
Yes.
Right, because there are also objectives that we're given from the board and from our investment community and ultimately from our leadership to hit every function. It was a global exercise for us.
Okay.
And so we fully disclosed that globally. And it obviously has different nuances in different parts of the globe. And for us on the sales side, this would be North America, Canada, and U.S. We disclosed and we said, hey, look, here's what the voluntary retirement plan. We didn't say, hey, here's what it conjured up. It's X millions of dollars. But we said, look, it's not going to be sufficient, so it's going to impact, but we think it's going to be relatively small, which it was. For us, it was 4.
Okay.
Total impact was about 18, 19 in total.
Okay.
And we also suggested, in full disclosure, we're going to look at spans of control. We're going to look at director level and above, and we're going to try to optimize because, again, the lower you go, the more people are impacted.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
So-
yeah.
And my personal point of view is I'd rather stretch accountability and spans of control first before I take out an account manager or an analyst.
Right. Yep.
And again, it's heartbreaking. We had some tough choices along the way. I think those that took advantage of the voluntary retirement program were in generally a good place. Like I feel like the company does a really nice job with that. So that always,
that's huge.
yeah, not everyone does a good job with that. McCormick, I think, is pretty generous.
Yeah.
And continues to be. And then I think we're pretty thoughtful and balanced as it relates to those that were basically saying, hey, it's an involuntary. And I had personal conversations with several of them, So, back to your original question, how do you do it? I think you got to treat people like adults. Not everyone can assimilate that information effectively. I think the more junior you are, the more you are from the epicenter of the conversation,
Yes.
the broader array of conversation that's actually off point.
Yes.
It may be highly entertaining around the water cooler, but man, it's so out of context.
Exactly.
And I want to crush that. My whole thing is, how can you get this behind us as fast as humanly possible and thoughtfully?
Yes.
Right? So we can say, we're done.
Yes.
We're done.
Instead of like, it's coming.
Right.
It's coming. I was going to ask about the timing because
The
I
timing
do feel
for us,
like when it's
the timing
quicker, it's usually better in terms of like announcement versus action.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are legal implications that frustrate all, right? But they're prudent and appropriate. And I think everyone has to go through that. That was probably one of the longest parts of the process in addition to the modeling and everything else. But the modeling is in a small ecosystem. It's me and my team.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, and now we're debating, okay, what operating model is correct? What's the least disruptive, right? And it really is positional. It's not a performance issue. It's a positional elimination. So you have to be really thoughtful because there's legal standards that you have to navigate,
Absolutely.
right? But from start to finish, it was about 3 months. But in terms of being communicated, it was probably 2 and a half. But that 2.5 is lots of distraction, a lot of concern. Like real, and what's so fascinating to me, those that are the highest performers get nervous the fastest, particularly the junior ones, not necessarily the more senior ones that have been through a few of the movies before.
Yeah.
But if you're like, again, early in your journey, let's say 5 years or less, and I had conversations and people were like really concerned. I'm like, look, a company does everything possible to retain top talent, So, I mean, if I were to like put a bow on it, I think it's being as thoughtful as possible. You're never going to hit a bullseye with something like this with your people. Like it's
just hard. Like you said, one is one too many. So, I mean, it's tough all the way around.
It's horrible, right?
Yeah.
It's horrible to have one of those conversations. I've had way too many in my career.
Same.
Yeah. And right? I mean, you just, if you ever get comfortable with that, then you got to kind of get your pulse checked, right?
Agree.
Yeah. So, but I think our process was pretty tight. I think we were pretty darn transparent. I think there are things that we could have done differently, but nothing that I would say is earth shattering.
Yeah.
I do think we were over communicative.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I do. I don't necessarily know. We'll see if anyone calls BS on that on the podcast, but I felt like we were, as far as we could go. Like there's also limitations that I'm given, like, Bill, you can't go there just yet. And I go about as far as I can before my job's on the line.
Which I love about you.
Because I feel like people deserve that, right?
I feel agree.
Like, yeah, I feel like they deserve the really, really.
I agree, but like that's the fine line because it's like, I was just telling this story this morning. I was on a flight a couple months ago to Jackson Hole, and the pilot came over the loudspeaker and was like, we can't land because a plane just slid off the runway.
Oh,
and I was like, I don't need to know that.
That's
And then
too
a little
much.
bit later on, he was like, we're going to keep circling and we should be able to land in about 15 minutes. We have like 20 minutes worth of fuel. And I'm like,
These are
I don't
details.
need to know
Yeah.
all those things. So it's like, where's that fine line of not sharing enough to sharing enough and then sharing too much? And I, like you said, I don't know that you ever really hit that bullseye.
I bet you would get different answers from everyone that sits in this chair.
Probably.
Right. And I think there are also different company philosophies that
Yes.
that intercede and interject themselves into leadership.
Yeah.
Mine is not as restrictive until it hits a legal standard.
Yeah.
From my vantage point anyway. And so, and I've been in places where it's like, here's the big reveal. Like, and in some instances, you're not even aware as a leader. Like you're
hard too.
Right. And now you're navigating that
People
definitely
have questions and you don't know how to answer
Correct.
because you're like, I just found out.
I just found out about this myself. Yeah. So, pardon me. Yeah, that's a really tough one. That's a really tough one.
How did that impact the structure of your team?
So, yeah, that's a great question. So, from a direct report standpoint, a little bit, but not a lot.
Okay.
From a kind of an L2, like the director level underneath my VP community, quite a bit. So that's where we had a number of voluntary retirements that we could take advantage of. So, that's, and like as the higher you go up the scale, the less disruption you have within the broader employment community. Yeah. So we really looked at spans of control. We looked at roles that we could collapse.
Okay.
And we had a community of about, call it 25 directors, and we took 5 out. So that's a big nut. And, and then we looked at, sales territories that we thought we could collapse.
Okay.
And leadership opportunities too. And what I've always said to my team is, look, part of this is a math exercise, which is, horrible to say, but it is.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
It's horrible, but
we do that in our own households too.
Sure. And the company has every right to say we need to optimize, we need to get to this space, right? It's their checkbook. So how do you do that? And what we really focused on, at least from my perspective, is how do you minimize the risk up against the business? Where do you want to take risk?
Yes.
Right? Where don't you?
Yes.
So, if we're being intellectually honest, not all teams were impacted the same way, which sometimes causes frustration too. But you've got to step back and say, okay, first, voluntary retirement was disproportionately in one team.
And that's hard too, because sometimes people walk out the door that you don't necessarily want to walk out the door.
And I was just saying this at the retirement dinner that we referenced earlier. I was asked to make a list of all the folks that were eligible. Who do you think is going to go? And my batting average was less than 50%. Really? And I'm like, and you don't want certain folks to go, but it's voluntary and you can't cajole them.
When you offer that up, then
it's them, their spouse or significant other, and figuring out whether it's the right time. And there's definitely people that walked out the door. I mean, we lost over 300 years of experience.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like that's what I said to my leadership team. I'm like, we have lost just remarkable experience. Yeah. And folks that just bleed McCormick. Like I got one, he will never listen to this, but a guy by the name of Tim who was in the Southeast, he was an account manager, and he literally worked until the finish line, and he posted a huge win.
Aww.
Like literally like within a couple hours before his email was shut down.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, I love this guy. I'm like, how can I get a thank you to him? I don't have his personal email, so fortunately we got it. But like that is the passion.
Wow.
Like how do you replicate that?
I know.
Right? Like how do you replicate 20, 30 years of experience seeing and just the pure passion that comes with that.
And the pride.
Right?
And that is sometimes I think companies do underestimate that impact a little bit in terms of just it's hard sometimes to replace some of that knowledge and that experience, especially if it's just happens to be a greener workforce or someone else that comes in that just doesn't have that level of experience and knowledge.
So then you think about that dynamic, and then to your question, okay, so now you've got a disproportionate amount of voluntary retirements in one area.
Yeah.
Do you want to involuntarily impact a broader area to balance it out, or do you take more? It depends on where it sits. So I would have loved to have unpacked just how thoughtful and balanced those conversations were around my leadership table for
Yes.
the broader group to hear.
Yes.
Because there's frustration that comes with job elimination. It's like, oh, wait a minute, you just took 5 opportunities for me to be promoted out of the mix.
Yeah.
And for those that were ascending up and are ascending up,
Yeah.
I've always said, like, the journey's not over.
Yeah.
Just when you think a door's closed forever, something opens up, right? And
Yes.
we're going through that right now because we've got a ton going on. But I think if they heard the leadership team and just how thoughtful they were and how they worked through it, and they really thought about those that didn't take it and where we were going to place our bets. For the 4 individuals that were impacted, they're never going to agree with my statements. Nor should they. Nor should they.
Yeah.
But I think for the broader populace, I'd like to think that they would be proud of the leadership team.
Well, and I appreciate you going into that detail, because I was thinking the same thing as I was listening to you about the fact that you were really detailing a very thoughtful approach. And I think a lot of times companies will say, we do not make these decisions lightly. And sometimes people think that's lip service. And maybe it is in some organizations, but I really think also many times people don't realize how much thought and effort and heartache actually does go into this decision-making process.
Yeah, I think the heartache statements are really, that resonates for me. I mean, I'm emotive, as you know, like, and I typically emote when I'm really happy. Like, you know what I mean? Like my wife and kids are like, are you crying? Like, I'm just so proud of you. Like, that's my cry.
I think that's my goal on this podcast, is to get you to cry.
We will edit that out. But, there were, these are very skilled, thoughtful leaders that are very passionate about their people. And that's why they sit in the chairs that they do. And I think we're blessed with, not just, and when I say leaders, I'm talking, L2, L3, like folks, anyone that manages people in my organization has a really caring approach, in my humble opinion. We have opportunity areas, myself included, as leaders, but it pulls on your heartstrings when you are going through, because it's a box exercise and an operating model first.
Yes.
But when you're going through that, it's like person X is
families.
Yeah, these are folks that have no idea, and they're going to wake up one day. I think we notified them March 1st, and everyone across the company got notified then. And I just picture someone walking back to their spouse or their kid or whatever it may be. And if you don't have that, then you're not thinking through the process right, in my opinion. You've got to really soul search, right? And that also forces, in my opinion, have we advocated for everything else?
I was just going to say that. It really, I think, forces you, if you do it right and you do it well, it forces you to really make that your last option.
Yeah.
Can we do anything to avoid having to go down this path and making it that last option?
Yeah, and some of it's edict. Some of it, in this case, it wasn't necessarily edict, but it was pretty clear what the rules of operation were going to be. I've definitely been creative in the past. This instance was not at our disposal, but it necessitated some really thoughtful discussion relative to impact. Yeah. And I think you got to put impact. You got to put again, future operating model, where you're going to take risk. And some of it is, again, the team may say, well, you took a lot of risk in this space. Yeah, and we're making a calculated choice. And if we made a mistake, guess what? We're going to go quickly back to leadership and say, guess what? We made a mistake.
Well, and that's huge too, because I've been a part of situations where, and I want to talk about this with you as well, collapsing responsibilities, increasing spans of control. It was cutting people but not services. And so then suddenly it becomes a lot of do more with less. And on the people who remain, that message is a tough message.
Survivor syndrome.
So now my friends are gone and I have to do more work at the same pay rate and be grateful that I'm still working and all of that. And so it's helpful for me to hear you say, hey, listen, maybe there is an openness to, perhaps we cut too deep there, or perhaps there's some things that need to change post decision. That we need to.
I think we need to. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think you need to let the operating model have a chance. Like that's always been my philosophy. Like, hey, you can't render that conclusion 3 weeks after we made this call, right? So we need to at least give it the college try.
Yeah.
We fully believe that we made calculated choices with individuals that we thought had future leadership potential and could increase span of control.
Yeah.
Right. And not all of it fits nice and neat based on where those people sit.
Right.
So we've also had to be flexible on certain elements of the operating model. Some I'm still a bit like, I'm like, okay, is this going to work? But I believe it'll work because of the people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I can think of two off the top of my head. I'll name them because they know it. Renee and Ryan, who took on more, really gifted guys, like really skilled leaders.
Yeah.
We felt like they probably wouldn't agree with this. We felt like they had some capacity, and at the same time, we wanted to stretch them.
Yeah.
You know, and
those are just a new challenge.
Yeah,
here.
and that's just two case studies. I could list several more.
Yeah.
And it just personalizes it. Like, I can recall these discussions and thinking through, like, is this going to be feasible and also fair? Like one that we did in Canada. It's tough. I mean, we got two really talented directors up there that assumed another director's role, and that's a small director community. So, and I have every faith in the world that they can do it. But I also just want to reflect, in a fairly short period of time, like, do we set them up for success? Like, I know they're getting after it because I've seen it. Like, and I've heard from the leader up there, which that leader just changed, which we can talk about. But meaning the VP of Sales of Canada. So immensely talented. Two immensely talented guys, but that's under duress for them, right? They just watched one of their colleagues go.
Yes, and then they have to try to quickly rebound.
Yeah,
and
they've got a new team that they know, but they don't, right? Because they're now leading them versus seeing them in the hallway. So all that kind of intersected with the objective. Like, it all comes back down to there's an objective.
Yes.
Okay, so how do we do that as thoughtfully and transparently and humanely as possible?
Yeah. And how do you, to me, there's so many opportunities to really step up as a great leader in those moments and to show true leadership. So how have you led your whole team through this? And then what types of things have you encouraged your leaders to do? Because I know you're a leader of leaders.
Yeah.
In terms of,
and I'm blessed with those guys.
Getting people focused, because if I recall, I mean, you're coming off of a better quarter. I mean, I feel like things are hopefully turning. And so you want to get people ready to go and excited about the future as much as possible. How do you do that from a leadership context, or how have you done it?
Yeah, I mean, similar to the last podcast, I would venture to guess that some would say I could definitely do it better. But I'll harken back to some of the things that we talked about as a leadership team. Like, we communicated in alignment with my boss, in fairness, but we went right to the line. Because as soon as this came out, it created chatter. So we really wanted to let them know, like, look, we're going to get after it. We're going to be thoughtful, but there will be disruption.
Yes.
We let them know that we were looking at spans of control. We let them know how we were thinking about it. We didn't commit to anything. We didn't say it was going to be one person, 0 people, or 10.
Yeah.
Because we needed to see how the dust settled.
How it was going to shake out.
Right, because the VRP was coming together at the same time that we were hypothesizing how the model would actually operate. So again, I would say, I think from my leadership team, they were ensconced in it with me, so they saw the process, so they could speak very genuinely and thoughtfully about, okay, like,
I was in the room too.
I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always believed, like, you know, in instances like that, we've got to be around the table together.
Yeah.
Now, it was virtual because it was so fast, but
right. But that helps drive ownership over the message.
Oh yeah, yeah. And in many instances, I framed initial thinking, but I said, look, the objective can be achieved many, many, many different ways. I'm open to your thoughts. My thought is, and in many instances, folks came with very different thinking.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and minimized, I give them credit, like, minimized disruption. So, in terms of the communication path, I mean, again, it's not rocket science from my perspective, and it's probably just retracing steps. We were very transparent. We were frequent as we thought was appropriate without churning, because what we didn't want to do is just talk about it without something new and tangible.
Yes.
So when we had something new and tangible,
reminding them something's bad's coming.
Yeah, it's like,
I just want to remind you something bad's coming. Like, it's about to happen.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like, yeah. So keeping people focused, like trying to treat them as adults, being as transparent as the company would allow us, and then just committing, like as soon as everyone was notified that was impacted, that was an involuntary, right? People that were dismissed, their jobs were eliminated.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they could also then apply to openings, which so some actually took advantage of that. So, which doesn't always happen.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So that's also another great signal in terms of how McCormick thinks about.
Yeah, I was going to say kudos to McCormick for setting it up that
way.
way.
And it's like a standard. It's like, look, if someone wants to chase this, even if it's a demotion, they have the right to go after it. And if they earn it, they still have to earn it.
Sure.
But if they earn it, game on. Like we're going to support them to the best of our ability. So so we were purposeful on cadence. Like we mapped out a cadence that we thought was appropriate.
Yeah.
And not what we felt was overly disruptive. And we kind of knew as soon as that last individual that was adversely impacted that we could then get on the horn and say, okay. And we were able to unpack even organizational charts, and let's talk about like exactly what the objectives were, who left the building, who's leaving the building, because not all the voluntary retirements wanted to be known necessarily. So we had some sensitivity on like, do you want to even let people know?
Yes.
And so that eventually became more standardized. And I think that's just what people want to know, like who's leaving, what counterparts are going, like how are you thinking about this? Is it over? Is it over? I think that's the biggest question.
Yes.
And is there another round coming?
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest question to try to answer, because the answer is, I don't know.
Right?
It's like the truthful answer is
For
I don't know.
any company, because none of us can predict the future. I mean, you hope not.
Right.
You hope you're done.
I think it's over.
And it's very unsettling to say, I don't know.
Right.
But at the same time, we I think operate under a false sense of security in our jobs.
Yeah,
often.
and I think I know we've got a topic on several like safety mechanisms for leadership to evoke, but you can't misrepresent. Like I've always said to folks, like,
worse.
100%. So for me, it's like, look, it's over, but the best thing we can do to avoid this in the future is perform.
Yes.
Like we have to perform. We have to deliver expectations, and that affords us the insurance policy that everyone gets to take advantage of in this building that is still here. And again, our numbers were pretty small. It was like 1% of our total population, and that includes factory, which is disproportionate, right? But if you look at the white collar population, it's still small relative to what you've seen in the tech industry, and even some of our peers. Like some of our peers have been more aggressive, and that's just not core. That's just not been core to who we are.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's your culture.
No, and we struggle with it, right? Like not cost out per se, but cost out on the human dimension, in my opinion. I've seen far more aggressive models and far more frequent cadences of
like
disruption.
Once a year, or
we're going to prune the tree.
A standard,
we're going to
year.
Who's your C players? Let's stack and rack. And
Jack Welch, bottom 10%, all of those. Those models are still out there.
Oh, sure they are, and I've seen it, and had to execute it. You know, so that is. If you've lived in McCormick your entire professional life, you really haven't seen what other models are out there, and other models are far more aggressive. So that's a blessing, right? Like that's one of the beauties. That's why I stay at McCormick too. They just there's just a good soul there.
That sounds like it.
Yeah. Oh, 100. Yeah. Big time.
And that's massive for people. And I think anytime you go through something like this, whether you're directly impacted or not, I do think it's a good message and a good reminder around just always be thinking about your role and the value that you bring to the table. What is it that you bring? What is valuable? How do you add value to the business?
Act like an owner, right?
Yeah. What are ways that you can positively impact the success of your team, your department, the company? Because to your point, if we can perform and execute well, then hopefully we won't have to be in this situation again. Understanding that sometimes there's just factors outside of the company's control.
This I would view as an unforeseen circumstance that unfortunately was our reality, and it wasn't unique to us. I think that makes it easier to digest, not necessarily palatable, but it's like, okay, I kind of get it. When it's unique to you and everyone else around you is successful, now it's like, am I at the right company? Like, where am I?
What's wrong here?
And I think the other lesson that was beat into me many years ago is just fiscal conservatism with your resource budget. It doesn't mean you're not going to invest in people, but when you have someone advocating expansion of a function or a sub-function. Like, do we really need it? Let's talk about this, right?
Yes.
Because as we've been, and this is again a function of the entire leadership team, we've been very judicious with the company cash.
That's smart.
Like I firmly believe, like, hey, if I'm not willing to spend it personally, why am I going to spend it professionally? And when I talk about the company cash, the biggest expense for us is people.
Sure, for most companies.
Yeah, for the SG&A line, right?
Yeah.
So do we really need it? Can we think about different operating models? And we've added in the past, but we're pretty conservative when it comes to that as a sales function holistically.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's smart because I think while I don't know the story of all of the companies, especially some of these tech companies that are doing these massive layoffs, a story that I am hearing quite a bit is just they experienced explosive growth during a period of time. They staffed at a level of this is going to be our forever situation.
Correct.
And then things changed and it was like, oh, now we don't need all these people.
Correct.
So to err more on the conservative side, even though that might feel like, oh gosh, I got to take on a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it might, in the long run, provide a little bit more security and stability.
Yeah. I mean, I use it. It doesn't mean I'm going to win every battle, but I use it with leadership. Like, look, our cost of sales has been down for 10 straight years. And some of that's my predecessor, and some of that's, obviously, I've been there 8.5. So, and we've added bodies, but we've added at half the rate of sales.
Yeah.
So, when you treat it that way, it doesn't preclude something like what just happened from happening, but it certainly raises the question of, are all functions created equal? You want to at least be able to state your case.
Yes.
For your people.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
I mean, at least I do.
Yeah.
And so that's been the biggest enabler for me and my team is just being judicious, not frugal to the point where you can't support people, but because we reward performance. I think we do it pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious when you have to collapse roles, or I know sometimes when these situations happen, the hierarchy flattens a little bit, and sometimes that can feel like a lack of opportunity, especially the higher you go in an organization. There are fewer spots for you to continue to move upwardly into. How have you managed that? How have you managed this? Because I know that impacted your team as well.
Yeah. So we had, I think this could digress into many different conversations, but so we had 2 retirements on my direct reports. So 2 VPs retired behind this.
Oh, wow.
2 really skilled leaders with a lot of industry experience. One was our Canadian leader, Aaron, and one was Frank, who was it's called geography. But so those roles were, we debated not replacing some of them because, again,
that's always an option. That's a cost saving there.
Yep. And we determined for succession planning purposes, for talent, and actually just frankly to run the business, it was going to be a necessity, because when you start looking at span of control for my office and then subsequently down, it was like, is this even fair? Yeah, realistic. And I'm not worried about my span necessarily, but more, I mean, I've had wide spans of control in the past, but there's a certain, I think it's pretty clinical in terms of what is appropriate. Yeah, you can only push it so far. You can go far, but then industry would tell you, any expert would tell you it's too far. So we opted to replace both of those. So then that created 2 opportunities that don't happen very often. Right. And that creates a daisy chain of effect. And it only creates a daisy chain if they're sourced internally, and both just happen to be sourced internally. We had some really tough choices to make with some really talented folks that went through that process, right? So we made them. We just finished that up. So we replaced Erin in the Canadian market with a really talented young lady by the name of Tracy. She would probably say I'm not young anymore, but she's very young in my eyes. Right. She's great. Be fine with it. Yeah. She'll take it. Very young. She'll Tracy's take it. And a young man by the name of Prakash, who took over Frank's role, and they went through a gauntlet of interviews with me and cross-functional team members, and frankly the previous owners in some regards. Wow. And did really well. And but I would say we were faced with a really talented pool, and really internal pool. Yeah. I mean, we did go external, and we and our bias, mine 100%, is to promote within. If I can't confidently do it, I will absolutely go outside.
Yeah.
But that's a bias for the company too.
Great.
And so we were blessed, but we typically run concurrent. It's almost a mandate. We run concurrent external search.
Yeah, just to see.
Yep. So we did that both in Canada and in this geo role. And hey, there was some great talent out there for sure. And I talked to a number of them, but I felt like we had a number of really good candidates to choose from for both roles. So that was pretty cool. So what ends up happening now is you've got now director roles that are vacated, right? That even though you collapsed, it's like, well, now that
now that's open.
So when the message went down in March, it's like, okay, well, now all these director roles are gone. What do I do? I don't have any opportunity. And all of a sudden, boom, boom. It's like, now we got 2 here.
Yeah.
So there's a cascade effect.
There's that domino effect that starts to
there's
happen.
sales opportunities in various geographies. We had some folks that just wanted a change, and we supported that change where they just wanted to call on a different account or take on a different experience. And it's not done. Like once the daisy chain starts, and I think it's going to last for another 6 to 12 months.
And I always think it throws people off when, especially if a company is going through any sort of reduction, downsizing, to see open positions really throws people off because they're like, wait a second, why are you hiring if you are eliminating positions? And you're like, well, funny how this all works, but actually some of those changes actually create opportunities over here.
So your question, which absolutely is coming up now, was how do you talk to people about doors closing? Yeah,
because to say yes to those great folks is a no to other talented folks.
Or folks that aspire for a director role that are one click below that now see a bunch of doors closing and they're like, I'm
never going to get to that role.
I'm never going to. I love when someone says never or always because it's false. So
Yes.
I've had conversations as recently as this week so I'll get to the candidates that we disappointed. But I've said to some more junior folks, like, look, just when you think the doors close, something happens, right? And this is a good example of something happening. We're gonna continue to be aggressive on acquisition. We're gonna continue to watch people be asked to take on different opportunities, and you just don't know when they're gonna happen. Like, God knows the company could put me in a new role, and that creates a daisy chain of epic proportions.
Absolutely.
Right? Or
you just
someone
know.
decides to retire and we didn't have that on our radar, or someone finds a new opportunity that just works for them and their family, and all of a sudden we've got a cascade effect that we've got to work on. So for me, it's
never say never.
100%. And we treat succession, and I was just on with my HRBP right before this, and we were talking about succession planning. And do we have these key roles? And when I say key, I'm talking about L2, L3. So my directs and their directs.
Yeah.
Do we have them sourced? Do we have the right talent? Do we have a pool that we can pull from confidently?
Yes.
And if not, what do they need?
Yeah.
So
and that's especially important as soon as new people go into the roles. And people think I'm crazy when I say that. Day one, start thinking, if you're brand new into that role, immediately start thinking about your own succession plan.
Yep. Agreed. So getting back to those that went through the VP process and disappointed. So that I would say, outside of letting someone go, disappointing someone that you respect deeply and has been delivering, and I'm not saying this because we're recorded. I will say this: I don't put anyone through an interview process to pacify them.
Oh,
I think that's total.
Huge. Yeah, don't do that, people.
Well,
don't do that.
But I know folks that are like, we should put them through the process, and that'll pacify them. No, it actually pisses them off, right?
Yeah, because you're giving them false hope that they actually have a shot when they don't.
And then you got to unwind all that.
Oh, yeah.
So we had 3 individuals disappointed on the U.S. role, and we had 2 in Canada. So I had 5 in total. 5 really talented folks. Now they are at different stages of their journey.
Yeah.
They absolutely could have done the role. In some instances, it was neck and neck. Like, the debrief was what really brought closure in one of the searches. I won't say where, but it was like, okay, let's beat up these factors, these competencies, because these individuals were that good.
Yeah, which is a great
It's a great problem to have. But
not for them, but for you.
Well, right. And having those conversations and disappointing folks, and some handle it well, some are pissed, and how do you get them over that? And how do you, in my mind, it's the recommitment to being transparent and treating them thoughtfully and carefully, and then they've got to make choices too, right? And I'm like, look, I want you to stay, and let me tell you what we're going to do. And in all those instances, like, we're going to put them through some leadership assessment work that we would only typically put a VP through. All 5 of those individuals are going to get that.
Nice.
Which is one of the things, that was an HR idea.
I love that idea.
And I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So they will all come away with.
We're investing in you.
Yeah. They would not typically get that.
Yeah.
At least, we don't have to afford that to them at this stage of the process. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, because it's like an exception to your standard practice.
Yeah. And let me think about this. Am I right? For 4 of the 5, they all got expanded roles. For 4 of the 5 got expanded roles. So that's a signal to them that, hey, we think you can do more. We're investing.
Yes. You might not be quite there yet, or for whatever reason you weren't the right fit for this role at this time. But that doesn't mean it's never.
We're gonna test your athletic skills.
Yeah.
And we're gonna see what you can do. And some may say, hey, well, what does that mean? Right now, it means competency building. Presumably with success in position, it could mean compensation building, right? Like all that, predicated on results, all that's fair game. And again, I've always said you'd love to have talent stacked as cordwood, but comes a day where you got to also be comfortable with some of it departing. And I am very hopeful that none of these folks will depart, but I'm also mature enough to know that we've got really talented people that have really high aspirations. And I think we just have to continue to be really honest with them. I've always said to anyone that wants to talk to me about a great opportunity that's outside of McCormick or outside of Heinz, like I will absolutely have that conversation.
Yeah.
If you so entrust me.
I love that.
If you so entrust me, and then I will guide you.
Yeah.
Based on what I know, and I may not know enough. I may say, hey, this is a tough call.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of companies, and some of them are great and some of them aren't so great.
Right. And I'm going to be objective with you.
Yeah.
I had that opportunity one time. I called my boss and I said, this is kind of awkward, but I have an opportunity to go somewhere else. And this person, he had actually left the company and come back. And so I really wanted his opinion as well.
Yeah.
But he was my boss. And I was like, this is kind of awkward, but I just want to be open with you. I have an opportunity to go do something else. And I respect you. And I just want your somewhat unbiased opinion as much as you can. I knew he would give it to me because I knew that he cared more about me as a person than he cared about me as an employee on his team.
Yep.
And he gave me great advice. And
I care deeply about, hey, some of these folks push me to my limits, and I love them for that. Like I want people to push me, and I want them to advocate for themselves because that's what I tell them, right?
Yeah.
But I also want them to entrust me with what the really is for them and their family, and what has to be real for them, right?
Right. I think you respect people enough to recognize that at the end of the day, they have to make a decision that's best for them.
100%.
And you care about them.
Yeah, and part of the mapping exercise that can be really frustrating for some, it didn't come up in this specific instance, but I've seen it is when the personal agenda does, and we talked about this I think in the first podcast. The personal agenda does not mix with the professional, meaning I've got to move or I've got to travel more than I ever wanted to, and I've got young kids, or I've got doesn't matter what the hook is personally that is diametrically opposed to the professional journey.
Yeah.
I've always said your personal agenda's got to supersede anything else, right? And we can work with that as long as we know it.
Yeah.
If you don't disclose it, then it's a mystery in a box that I can't actually work around.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that most folks entrust us with that, and they know that we care about them sincerely.
Yes.
But
that's
deeply.
so huge. And that requires a lot of emotional maturity and setting the ego aside from a leader perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done it at McCormick because I haven't been presented the opportunity. I've definitely coached someone, more than someone. I've coached folks away from opportunities, not to save them, but to I said you need to really think through this, and this. Mm-hmm. If it were, sometimes it's just a massive compensation shift. There was one, the massive compensation shift early in life, young kid, and it's like I can't replicate that for 2 more moves.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's your number one priority. Guess what? You probably should take it.
Yeah.
Which is heartbreaking to watch someone, but that's the best thing for them, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've definitely had more conversations on like really think about the equity that particularly as you get to more senior levels. Like it's hard to create sponsorship and advocacy if you're wildly talented. You're throwing, you're assuming that you can recreate that, and I am absolutely a case study of where I thought I could and I couldn't. Yeah, because you underestimate how invested some folks are in. That's what I would pressure test with anybody. Like, unless, of course, you got like a $60,000 increase and you're making $100,000, you're like, okay, I got to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I got to do that for my family. Yes, of course. But if it's like, it's 10 grand and it's a lateral move, or it's 10 grand and it's like, it feels like a promotion, but it's just a title change. It's like, okay, what are you really doing? Like, are you, and do you know where you sit?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, because, and by the way, if you know where you sit and you think, I'm not sponsored.
Yes.
And I would tell somebody like, hey, you're in the middle of the pack, and if this gets you to the top of the pack somewhere else, like, go.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, I think sometimes people will underestimate credibility. But if they have good credibility in their current organization, number one, how much time that takes. And number two, the fact that you just don't automatically go somewhere new day one and have instant credibility, unless you're a consultant.
You're paid to have instant. Yeah.
But I mean, starting over, it's like first day of school. Yeah. And I think that alone sometimes prevented me from leaving my job, because I was just like, gosh, I've worked here for so long. I've built so many relationships. I like to think, built some pretty good credibility.
Right.
I had good sponsorship, and the thought of starting over somewhere new where I didn't know if I was going to have that or how long it was going to take to build it back.
It's massive.
It is.
It's one of the big tugs that I had a wonderful, we talked about them already, so we won't revisit those tapes. Wonderful, both peer group, boss, cross-functionals. I felt like I was treated fairly from a compensation perspective. I know I could make more. I pressure tested that. I knew.
Yeah.
Full stop, I could make more money, and in a meaningful way. But I didn't want to move my family. And I also was like, God, these guys and gals are supporting me in a huge way. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that, folks do underestimate that is really hard to pressure test is culture, right? And whether that fits or not.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know
I love this tangent that we've gone on, though, because I think these are really relevant issues that a lot of people are dealing with right now. I mean, we started this conversation talking about a company or a leader having to make employment decisions on behalf of people on their team. Yeah. But you also have a lot of people the talent market is still very volatile. You've got a lot of people that are getting spooked. They're jumping ship. Yep. They're seeing money thrown at them, although I think that has slowed down, calmed down from what it was a year or two ago. But people are seeing these opportunities coming up and they're jumping pretty quickly in many cases. And I do think this is an important lesson for those individuals too, to really think about.
And finding a mentor or a safe place. It doesn't have to be me per se if it was McCormick, but again, some have entrusted me with it and I treat it very carefully. And the company probably wouldn't want me to say it. I treat it as what, if my daughter was coming to me, this is kind of hokey, but if my daughter was coming to me, I would want to give her the most clear insight possible. And I treat those conversations as if it was a family member.
Yeah.
And,
because you want what's best for them.
Yeah,
that's
100%.
Good leadership.
Yeah, 100%. No, it's hard.
I know. It is hard.
It's so anyway, those, I'm excited for the journey, more so, it's tough getting to that stage. It's tough disappointing people, but it is an exciting time for a lot of these individuals, those that expanded role, those that got promoted.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
And some of it is a wait and see.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I'm confident they're going to get there. I really am. I wouldn't have given it if we weren't really informed on their competencies and capabilities.
Yeah.
Right? I'd be shocked, frankly, if these individuals can't just excel.
Yeah.
I'd be shocked.
That's all. But see, a huge lesson, I think, to take from this conversation is, to me, what I'm interpreting by listening to you is that you know your people. Like you've taken,
and my people know,
and your people know their people.
Yeah,
you can't make these types of decisions without really knowing these people, and that takes time. That is an investment.
Yeah, and I would say that's the one thing. I was just talking to one of my VPs today, heading in here for a one-on-one, and I said I need to get out with these folks more. Mm-hmm. Like it's the one thing I miss the most, and I feel like I'm not as effective, that I just need to recommit to.
Yeah.
And the tug of my role as it changed over COVID and the internal pressures have taken me away from knowing so many folks that have joined. Like we're having our first live sales meeting in a couple weeks.
Oh, that's exciting.
Since 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we were pretty conservative on the COVID front, myself included. Like and so this will be great just to see everybody, like the people that I haven't met live. You know, I'm like, oh
Wow.
wait, and I'm like reintroducing myself to people that I've met virtually. I'm like, I don't think I've seen you live, but yeah, I
haven't seen all of you, just this much.
Yeah, just this. Yeah, so I think recommitting to that. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm not as good as I was pre-COVID because I saw people more often. You know, I was in market more often. I traveled more often.
Yeah, there's
so
been
I think
an
if they I always think of like if they're listening, what would they say? They would probably call BS on that. They'd be like,
Bill's trying. That's
Bill's
what I say.
trying,
Bill's trying.
but Bill definitely needs to do better.
That's good. You're humble. You're self-aware.
Yeah, like I need to be in Canada more frequently. I need to be in our sales offices more. I need to be with customers more. I need to be more externally focused than I have been. And the company's not suggesting I'm doing anything wrong. It's just more that tug for me.
But that's important too, because I think those are those thoughts that do require some intentional calendaring and really commitment to like, I need to be doing this. I should be doing that. I mean, I feel like I have moments every day where I'm like, I really got to do this. I need to focus on that. Yeah. But then sometimes it's just like a fleeting thought and I move on to the next thing. So it's like, okay, no, I actually need to make that happen.
That's what I was talking with my one guy. And I just said, we got to get this on the calendar now. Yeah. Like it's just too important
it's just not
it's long overdue. Yeah. So anyway.
So we've talked about a lot. Yeah. And
once again,
I know.
I don't know how relevant it is for people.
So many more questions
All right.
for you.
We can fire up.
I feel like we talked about something that I think is a challenge that's facing many businesses right now, but I'd also like to kind of throw some other scenarios at you.
Okay. Are these unscripted?
No. Maybe, but like I love your perspective because you're a leader of leaders. You work in a large organization. Yeah. You've been through a lot on your leadership journey. So I just love the wealth of experience and wisdom you have. So you just talked about travel and getting back together in person. And I know it's so fascinating right now, just watching different companies, clients struggling with, should we force people to come back to the office? Do we do
very timely? Yeah, because that was a today conversation.
Was it really? Mm-hmm. Okay, will you just provide perspective? You can talk about your thoughts, McCormick's thoughts. I don't care. Both.
I think McCormick. I think we talked about this, so I won't drain the whole thing. I think McCormick, even pre-COVID, was remarkably flexible. Like I'm a good example of that. I live in Pittsburgh. I work in Baltimore. I was on the road. I made that choice for my family.
And that was like a long time ago, too.
Yeah, that was 8.5 years ago. Yeah. Right. So, but I made a commitment to the company and then to my people and then ultimately to my family that just worked for me. It wouldn't work for everybody, but I lived out of a bag for 48 weeks a year. You know?
Yeah, like you would drive, Sunday night?
Yeah, drive or I'm with customers or whatever it may be. Yeah. So, and that was a choice I made and it worked. So point being is, I think the company, has demonstrated the agility even pre-COVID when this became, very popularized maybe on flexibility remote and things of that nature. Now, what I would say is some of my customers are still not really even reemerging from the remote model. Yes. Many are
Canada, especially because I know you have Canada as well.
Yeah, Canada is definitely opening up live, meaning customer meetings. But I've got large customers. I won't say who, but large customers that are still predominantly virtual, right? So, and so there's that, and then there's the how often should we be together?
Yes.
Debate. How often and is this valuable?
Yes.
And what I would say is that is like, blades of grass in your yard. Like there are thousands of points of view. It's like looking up at the stars, right? So but I think the cornerstone for us, which is how I'll respond to the question, because I think each company would answer it differently, is we want to strike the balance of offering our employees the flexibility that we think matters from a talent retention and just personal effectiveness and life balance with the need to collaborate live because I believe this too, and I'm remote. So for me to come into Hunt Valley is a big time commitment. It's 4 hours on the road. It's 4 hours back. It's nights in a hotel away from my family versus, commuting in from, downtown Baltimore. 35 minutes, so, but each person's narrative is different in terms of what they need or want.
And what they're willing to do.
Correct. So I think where we will ultimately land is, and our program is called MyFlex, and it's basically a 50-50 proposition. The challenge for us is, is everyone adhering to that? The answer is, I think there's pressure testing going along the edges that we're trying to really give clearer rules of engagement for effectiveness. And I also think it's just right for fairness and transparency and all the things that we talked about before. Like if someone's cutting a separate deal and they're never in the office and I've got to be there 50% of the time,
that's
then
not fair.
you're allowing folks to rewrite the rules independently, and that's never going to. Then my biggest fear is, I don't think this will happen, but my biggest fear would be, you lose the benefits of the program. Because it's not a God-given right that we're 50% remote, because we weren't pre-COVID. Right. So I think
and that's a struggle though, because I think a lot of people, I remember talking to folks on my team and they're like, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know that you have that option according to the company. Like I get that you can choose who you work for.
Well, right.
But I'm not sure that you're actually going to be given the option. And that's tough.
It is. And I think that's, I wouldn't say I think, again, we're doing a good job. I think we're trying to be fair, thoughtful, practical.
Yeah.
But we're also trying to ensure that the principles are held.
Yeah.
I would say that never before in my career has flexibility risen to the top of a discussion as to whether they're going to work for you or not. Right? Like I've had conversations with folks as recently as the VP search that we just talked about, like, hey, I'm not willing to do X, but I am willing to do Y. And because once you get a taste of it, and if you really like it.
Yeah, it's being worked into the negotiation process 100%. More so than vacation time and some of the things that people, compensation, people used to negotiate.
Home may be more valuable, to your point. Outside of compensation, home may be more valuable than sick time benefits, certainly vacation. I see folks, absolutely viewing that as a differentiator. I see folks using it to attract talent.
Yeah.
Right? There are different schools of thought on remote. And so I think, my view is, I think we're at a good balance. Not everyone agrees with that. My industry peers have very different philosophies. In fact, we talk about this openly. I have a share group next week, and it's going to be a topic. Like, hey, who's back? Like some companies went back like immediately. Like
mandated.
5 days a week mandated, and they were losing people. And they're like, yeah, guess what? That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not there. I think we've demonstrated that we can be effective remote.
Yes.
But rallying around complex issues and onboarding and leadership and coaching. Yeah. Like if you're sitting in your office for 50% of the time, it's a complete, utter waste of time.
Yeah.
If you're walking the floor, if you're meeting with folks, the flyby for me is some of the most valuable time I have, particularly with junior folks.
I love that flyby time.
Yeah, and they know when to get me, those crazy people, but they get me early, usually when I'm rocking out to some music. I was one of those
crazy people. I knew when to get you.
Yeah. So, but I love that. Like they feel comfortable. And I just had a conversation with a young lady who's super talented about like her journey and where she is in life and what she's aspiring to do. And she's absolutely interested in advancement and things of that nature, but she's got some personal constraints too. So, you're just never going to pull that off.
Yeah.
Virtually, there's never a time where it's going to be like, hey, let's grab a Teams call. I want to pick your brain. Like that's just not how it works.
Those mundane conversations that are the water cooler bumping it. Hey, what'd you do last night? Oh, I went to this really great restaurant that I love. Some of those types of conversations that we all just take for granted and think they're not worthwhile to have.
They're little bricks in a wall.
They are, and it bridges you to those tougher conversations because it's how you build that relationship and you build up towards. Hey, Bill, I'm thinking about leaving this organization, and that's a hard conversation.
Or I need to talk to you about X, Y, or Z. It's sensitive. Like there's just a trust that happens live that you can't get on a 1-by-1 picture of myself. With just my head.
But I think that's to me, that's a happy medium, like a 50-50. Gallup's done a lot of research on it, and they've said essentially it's like 2 or 3 days in versus 2 or 3 days out of the office. And I think it's what you do with that time that really matters too. To your point, like if you're going to call people back into the office, but they're going to sit in there at their desk on Teams calls all day, Are you really getting the value out of it?
And we've got some of that we're still
Yeah.
working through. And I think we're getting better. Like, folks are now like, I'm like, hey, look, if we're here and it's like 100% we're here, let's get in a room.
Yeah,
like,
let's
can we get
be
in a room?
here.
Let's be here.
Yeah, and do the things you can't do
Right.
when you're all at home. Like, let's go to lunch together. Let's go grab a coffee together.
100%.
Let's hash out like just something that's funky and hard to talk about. Do it live,
but
all
I think
in the room.
Transparency, like our chairman talked about it today. And I probably bristled a few folks, but I think all he was doing, in my opinion, was just reinforcing the principles that we've adhered to and why it's valued, meaning in person versus remote. And those that are desiring 100% remote, it's harder and harder to find.
Yeah, it is.
But they are there. They are absolutely there. My industry is pretty rare. Most are in a hybrid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I know of very few that are 100% remote anymore at this point in time. I would argue more are actually struggling with, can I go back to full?
Yeah.
And I personally think that would be destructive.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary.
I don't know that we've proven that's necessary.
No. So I like the balance, probably spend a little bit more time than you want. No,
because literally I hear about this, people asking me, hey, what are you hearing? What are other companies doing? How should we handle it? It's a hot topic. Yeah,
and I think that the other new, and I've seen it work and I've seen it fail, is when the war for talent, and at times, it doesn't matter what it is, necessitates flexibility at times. And so I always think that our employees, it doesn't matter what company, so this isn't McCormick specific, but they're looking for cracks in the armor on the promises that you're making and or the principles that you're driving. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why is someone working out of Texas, 90% of the time, and I can't work out of downtown Baltimore 90% of the time?
People are very aware of everybody else's arrangements.
Yeah. And it's like, look, if you're transparent with them as to why. Yeah. You may not like the answer, but you can at least address it. Yeah. It's when you're not that it becomes. But I would say that needs to be the exception versus the rule.
And
right?
make the why something that's worthy of.
It's got to be really compelling.
Don't make it some BS excuse because people see through that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't think I've seen examples of it elsewhere. I've seen not many, but a few in our organization. It's tough to navigate.
Well, I would just like to take a little history tour and commend you because I remember you calling me. This would have probably been like 10 years ago. And you were like, hey, how big of a deal would it be to give my team a little bit of flexibility? Oh, yeah. And that was pretty progressive, Bill. That was many years ago. But you were thinking.
We piloted at Heinz. There was a woman who I adore, so I'll say her name too. Like I've mentioned all these people.
I know, I love it though.
Yeah, but
I think it's
Christine
so cool.
Anderson worked with me, but really was the shepherd for splitting roles and almost dual roles at Heinz.
A job share and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Better said. Yeah. And also, we had a group that piloted work from home that was a pretty conservative work from home for Heinz. And we piloted in my group, and there were a lot of people that did that work, but Christine was one of the job share folks, and we did it, and we proved that it could work.
That's so cool.
And until you put water through the pipes, you really don't know.
Yeah, sometimes you have to try, but just that openness to flexibility.
Yeah, and I think folks just, again, treat me like an adult, tell me what I have to do. And I've always felt like I care when they're, I don't want to undermine what the company's trying to do. And I believe in the principles, for instance, at McCormick. I really do. But at the end of the day, if your child's sick and you're going to be 40% this week, make it up next week and just get the work done.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, let's deal with life first.
Yes.
Let's make sure you're good.
Yeah.
But, that doesn't mean that your work commitments go away.
Exactly.
You got to figure it out.
Yeah, it's just like you said earlier. Like, we want to be flexible with people. We want them to have a good personal life, but we also have a business to run. And
if you're doing laundry and doing errands when you're supposed to be doing work, I got a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But if you can fit that in at the same time that you're pumping out great work, okay, got it.
Exactly.
Like, love it.
Yeah.
I'm
Way
not
to
capable.
be efficient.
Yeah, I'm not as capable, but God bless you.
Yeah, no, but I think that's fair. That's fair. And to me, that's a happy medium. It's, we're not going to take advantage of you, but don't take advantage of us either.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, big time. And that's the risk when that's about the clarity of purpose and ensuring that folks really understand. When you say rules, it sounds so restrictive, but it's like, look, don't be the person that screws this up for everybody else. please just don't do that.
Yes.
Like, please,
Please don't ruin it
yeah,
for everyone
right.
else.
We're gonna lean in.
Yeah.
The company's gonna allow us to lean in, or we're gonna lean in together.
Yes.
Maybe not even ask for permission.
Right.
Not that happened. But
no, I would have never said just keep it on the DL and don't
right.
tell anyone.
Don't
Bill.
tell Beth. I
Yeah.
mean, so she'll never listen to this.
Yeah, she'll never listen.
Yeah. So, but you know what I mean? Like, let's breed the confidence that we can handle
because
it.
we want this to be a reward. So let's respect it and handle it well so that we can maintain this reward for everyone.
That's kind of what we're going through right now at McCormick. And I think it's highly unlikely that anything goes away. I think we would have to have just like full anarchy.
Such a strong business case too, like why it would make sense.
But what I would say is, why even put the leadership in a position to have that conversation?
Yeah.
Just play by the rules. Just play by the rules. And everyone gets to take advantage of those.
Exactly.
Right.
I love it. All right, another hot topic?
Let's do it.
Okay. So something else that's very top of mind that I'm hearing a lot about is well-being, mental health in the workplace. And if you think about, we're not seeing not surprising, but we're not seeing any good reports about the impact that the pandemic lockdown has had on people's mental health and well-being. Coupled with the fact that people are talking about it much more openly now than ever before, which is wonderful. Yep. However, we have leaders who I think are not prepared for those conversations, don't know really if it's their role to have those types of conversations. And I would just love to hear your perspective on that topic.
Yeah. So, I'll go down a personal path, not to, again, my kids will never listen to this, so it's probably appropriate. But both of my girls, because of COVID, dealt with various issues that they have now mastered. So I'm really proud of them. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know.
Especially for young, your girls are young.
Yeah, they're 20. I'll round up. They're 23 and 20.
That's young to me.
Yeah, that's young to me too. Yeah. They tell me I'm old, so, but I'm so proud of how they handled that. And they also had the patience to educate us as parents that I would say it's a generational thing too, right? Like some generations are more comfortable having that conversation.
For sure.
I would say the gift that my kids have given me beyond humility, keeping me humble, right, is that was one of them. It's not how you want to learn about that, but we learned about that as a family. And so I'm sensitive to it.
Yes.
I would never wish that on any leader to go through that with a child, but you do learn a lot about yourself, and you do learn a lot about what tools are available in society, and also what tools are not, and the struggles that are there.
Yeah.
I've only experienced what I would say is maybe stepping back. I would say there's two things. One will feel maybe a touch odd. I do think understanding what the lines are, because there are legal standards that you cannot cross when it comes to HIPAA and it comes to discussing someone's situation. It has to be volunteered to you. And I don't view myself as a mental health expert. I view myself as someone that can point someone in the right direction. And I can empathize to a certain degree with certain situations. But I do believe that it's about access. I had a really she left the company, and they were dealing with issues that my daughters were dealing with. So I won't obviously mention names or anything like that. And she went there with me in the last call it the last 3 years, and it was one of the most gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching discussions that I've ever had. Because I also did. You have no appreciation until someone's willing to be vulnerable with you, right? And then you have to really be careful. Again, legal standard, HR standard, and then also just okay, this is someone I care about. This was a kind of an informal mentee, but not someone that I would consider like uber close, but someone that entrusted me deeply. So it was lower level. It was not high in the organization. But we had really thoughtful discussions, actually multiple discussions. And I just shared what I saw and struggled with personally as my daughters went through some stuff. And I think just having an empathetic ear is probably job number one, and then quickly pivoting to here are tools at your disposal, because I am not a medical professional. I am not someone that is skilled enough.
I want to support you, and here's the best way I can support you.
And the the hardest part is, disclosing it to me is not really the enabler. Disclosing it to HR, disclosing it to those that can formalize how we navigate this productively is in your best interest.
Yes.
And that in this instance never happened, despite all of my efforts, because I really felt like if they entrusted the company, I think they would still be here personally. I really do. But, I think they're in a good place now. At least I believe so. But and again, hopefully I don't think I've crossed any boundaries. But I would say that was a tremendous learning experience for me.
Yes.
And I would say, to your point, folks are definitely more open.
Yeah.
And how you treat that, and how we had, we talked a lot about carrying conversations during COVID, just fatigue, depression, anxiety.
Yes.
Burnout
now is coming up a lot.
Yep. And how do you, and it was more about seek to understand, find the signals of it, and quickly pivot to, I need you to, not, need sounds too strong. I would strongly encourage you to take this path. I really care about you as a human being. I care about you as a person first and foremost, and I want you to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Encouraging people to take time, like I've encouraged people to take time off. Like, you need to step away.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what your vacation plan. I don't care if you're out of vacation days. Like, you need to step away. I've had those conversations.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt you, but is that more without them coming to you necessarily and disclosing, you seeing some warning signs or red flags as their leader?
Yes.
Okay. And
more about stress, and you can see. I wouldn't say deep discussions on depression or anxiety or something that's even far worse than that. I've never experienced like really tough, like, because you can imagine the scale. But definitely, stress in my mind induces anxiety, induces it can
exacerbate a lot of other things.
Yeah, and it can undermine performance.
For sure.
That's not my motivation. My motivation is you're not in a good place, and we need to get you in a good place. And I want to make sure that you do that for yourself. And I've seen that also on the physical side too, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, look, you're dealing with stuff I do not want you touching work until you're right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we'll figure this out.
This is about the whole person.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I don't necessarily know if I have any, overarching advice that would be groundbreaking for anybody. I'd like to think that most folks that are leading large organizations, I consider myself to be one that's blessed, I believe this sounds awful maybe, or awkward. Like, I'm a caretaker for 290 people. Like, I got to think about those 290 people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that includes this. And,
yes.
And if they're going to afford me the benefit of entrusting me with that feedback, then I need to have a commensurate response. Now, I think it's also incumbent upon our cross-functional partners, legal and HR, to equip us differently as this space evolves.
Yes.
What I would say is our programs at McCormick, and this was true at Heinz too, the resources at folks' disposal is more readily known.
Yeah.
And I think we do a decent job, but sometimes it's beyond what those services can afford too.
For sure.
Right. So I think empathy is the job number one. Active listening, job number two.
There's such a theme from this conversation today. Not that I didn't already know this about you, or it didn't come out in the first round, but just the amount of care that you have for people. I mean, you just said I'm a caretaker of 290 people, but I mean, that is so critical.
Yeah,
I think, for leadership success.
And we're blessed with folks that have. I mean, genuinely. Again, back to the, when you're going through tough times, that genuinely care about their teams in a big way. Like, can deal with performance. Like, the easiest thing to do is deal with someone that's not performing.
Honestly, I think so too, because it's kind of like, this is the standard. You're not there. Let's figure out what we got to do to get you there.
The hardest is someone that's performing that has a how issue. It could be personal, professional.
Yes.
And you see it.
Yeah.
And the really hard one is the one that is wildly successful that doesn't see it.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And I've been coached pretty aggressively in my in my years on how, and it's never been a what issue. It's more like, there's a bunch of bodies behind you. You need to think about that. Right. So, and I've seen that movie, but getting back to mental health, I think, for me, it's pointing the compass in the right direction, but really being thoughtful, really making sure, and I think preparing yourself as a leader for these conversations are going to be more frequent.
Yeah, if you haven't encountered it yet,
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
And also, you might be in a situation first where you're having to call something out versus someone disclosing to you.
Yeah, or at least attempting diagnosis in a very careful and thoughtful way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Right. Calling out's not the right word.
Well,
compassionately noticing.
Yeah. You're the HR person.
I wasn't very good at it.
Not true. But not something like depression, anxiety, or anything like that. But more like, hey, we've got something off.
The pattern has changed. Like, to me, that's the biggest sign is someone's pattern suddenly changes.
Right.
That should be a trigger for, okay, wait a second.
And folks, to your point on the front end of this question, which is, folks are definitely more comfortable sharing. They're more open.
Yeah, and be ready for that too.
Yeah, and that has shifted dramatically in probably the last half decade.
For sure. And I think there are a lot of folks, and even in my generation, who did not grow up thinking that was an acceptable thing to talk about at work, and therefore aren't super comfortable.
Yeah, myself included.
Yeah, when someone does approach that conversation. So I think that's great advice, is readying yourself and being a little bit more proactive about, expect that this is coming and think about, okay, how might I respond if someone comes to me? But also being aware of, if someone doesn't, but I'm noticing something off, what do I do? What do I say? How do I handle that? And being prepared for that situation too.
Yeah. One of the things, and I can definitely shoot you a name post, but and it was kind of by accident during COVID, because so much had changed in terms of stress level, in terms of, not seeing people. And, I do think it was one of the best rated trainings we ever did. And it was all about personal health, personal care, and self-awareness around that.
Wow.
And sending the message that it's you don't have to disclose anything, but you have to be physically and mentally well. And it went beyond that. But because folks may say, what training was that? It went beyond that, but the underpinnings were around awareness, and it was really the woman that did it was remarkably skilled at really evoking the response that we wanted at that time.
Well, and it sounds like it's very focused on building awareness in yourself, like noticing those patterns in yourself first before even somebody else would notice them in you.
Yes.
Very cool.
Agree.
Awesome. Okay, last question.
Yeah.
Assuming that you came back again a year from now.
A year, 8 months.
What are you most hopeful about, or would hope that you would be able to share if I said, hey, reflect on the last year?
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm most excited about. Not most, but certainly some things that I'm excited about that I would hope come to fruition. Like, we've got, as we discussed already, we've got a lot of folks that are taking on new journeys, new leadership journeys, and that's going to continue.
Yeah.
And I'd like to come back and say, wow, you know what? I learned a lot from these really talented folks. Like, I've got, I've got the most diverse team I've ever had around my table.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right? I've got 3 women. I had 1.
Wow.
I've got a person of color.
Yeah.
And all of them, and wildly different skill sets around that table.
Nice.
Diverse
in many factors.
Yeah, and that's not an indictment on the past tables of any kind. Like, they were all effective, but this is really new. Like, this is about as new as it gets.
Wow.
Right? Like, we've got 4 new leaders with less than a year in role around that table who are leading big organizations and big businesses and going to have a material impact on how our sales function evolves. And they bring, with new comes new perspective, new challenge, new questions, new ideas. And I'd like to think that I'm going to learn as much from them as I'm going to help them along their journey. Right.
Very
and
cool.
I'm really excited because they're already hitting me and
challenging you and stretching you.
And I love that. I mean, up to a point. No, I do love that. And I think all of them have unique skills to offer, meaning there's new folks, but there's some really tenured folks that I have a real ton of respect for that I think are going to influence the journey and continue to have the passion. So I'd like to think that, if you were saying, hey, what does your function look like now?
Yeah.
How did folks assimilate to their new roles? Like, what did you learn? What are you doing differently?
Yeah.
Like, what did they advocate for that you weren't thinking about?
Yeah.
Or that they were passionate about for their organizations? Or how did they pivot? Because they all have inherited, in some instances, a model that they didn't create, but they have the opportunity to shape it. They've all, to a certain extent, and I'm talking director and above, but this will be true for account level managers that are inheriting new businesses.
Right, that daisy chain. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like an example, we've got a new gentleman, Blake, who again probably will never listen to this, who's leading the Dollar General business for us, and we had a stalwart there forever. Mm-hmm. Like we've got like big customers that had folks that were up against them for 10, 15, 20 years. Wow. So it's like I lost all this experience. There's like
big shoes to fill.
Big shoes, but different thinking. Like, and who's going to who's going to grab that?
Yeah.
Who's going to that's what I keep telling the folks. Like, this is for my directors and above. I didn't give you this so that you could manage it. I gave it so you could lead it.
Yeah.
Right. So like, how are you going to lead it differently? Like, if you're going to lead it the same way, you probably have really short shifted yourself in terms of what the opportunities are, because you've got unique perspective. And I would hope they would say, hey, Bill, we messed this up and we need to think through this differently, or I've got an idea that I think we can advance. Just a different lens on the business has always proven to me to be really fruitful.
Yeah.
Right. And these are bright minds that have seen different movies than I've ever seen. And they come with different skill sets and have different passions around the people agenda and the performance agenda and our growth agenda. And I'm really hopeful that that's going to be something that we could potentially share in episode 4. Unless this is 2 episodes.
Glad that you've committed. This is definitely 2 episodes.
Is it? I don't even know.
I mean, did you really think that we would only have like a 30-minute conversation?
I'm not looking at the timer under fear that we've gone like 6 hours.
Not quite.
Yeah. Okay.
No, this is definitely a 2-parter, and I'm so glad that you've agreed to come back for a 3rd time. Thanks, Bill.
Outstanding. But hopefully that answers your question. I'm really excited about that. In addition to like the business, and I think the business has got a great trajectory, but that's not what this podcast is about, right?
So about leadership. Yeah.
I'm very excited about that, and I kind of shrivel up and die when I'm not learning, and when I'm surrounded by people that are super passionate and can test me and push me and challenge my thinking. I love that.
Yeah.
Like people are like, man, you've been in this role a long time. No, not really.
No, because
the role's evolving.
Changes, and you get stretched and pushed into new ways of thinking, then it's not the same thing.
Correct.
Awesome.
Yeah. This
has been awesome.
Yeah, you enjoyed it?
Thanks for making the 4-hour drive to
I
get
enjoyed
here.
it, as always. Is there anything else you had? Or?
Well, the lightning round.
Oh, this is...
Come on.
Can we edit the lightning round?
Maybe.
I failed miserably.
Listen, it's new questions. I'm not going to give you the same questions as last time.
Are you giving me more time?
No.
I feel like I failed
Everybody gets a minute.
A minute?
60 seconds, okay?
I want the producer to note that I am protesting the minute. Okay.
Staying in. All right. 60 seconds to answer as many open-ended questions as you can.
Okay, let's go.
All right, I'll skip the first question because that is a stumper. Okay, I'll give you a little pass here. On your mark and set, go. What most meaningful piece of clothing or jewelry you own?
Oh, it's my Eagles biking jersey.
Nice. If you catch me by the fridge at night, I'm probably sneaking.
Cereal, like milk for the cereal, yeah.
Best place you've traveled to?
Ooh, Ireland.
Nice. First job?
I was a busboy / dishwasher at Friendly's.
I love Friendly's.
Yeah.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Oof, science, actually.
Science.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have guessed math. Best gift you ever received?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Make someone mad.
No, I'm going to go right now because my birthday was Monday and my wife got me Blink 182 tickets, and I cannot wait to go see Blink 182.
Good job, Jerry. Okay.
Yeah, Jerry did a good job.
What superhero do you most relate to?
Oh, good Lord.
Yes!
Oh, man. I can't. The Flash, because I'm moving way too fast.
That's awesome. Okay, that's the best way to say it. I love it right there. The Flash. That was a good answer.
Was it?
You got through a lot.
Okay.
That wasn't so bad.
What was the first one that you were going to stump me with?
if you wrote a book, what would the title be?
Oh, good Lord.
See?
Really? Oh,
See?
that would have been the whole thing.
That's how much.
You have empathy.
That's how
you
much I love
actually
you, Bill Simon.
You exhibited some empathy.
Gave you a little pass there.
It would have been like I think it would have
kind.
been like do the opposite, because like for the first 15 years, as I reflect back, I'm like, God, how did someone was kind enough to help me through, Because
here's all the things I did. Now do the opposite.
Do the opposite. It's like Opposite George, right? The Seinfeld episode, which is a great episode. Anyway, all right.
Oh, this is amazing. Thank you, Bill.
Hey, thanks for the time. Hopefully,
he's getting paid overtime.
Is he getting paid overtime? All right. Are we done?
No. Let me close it out.
You're gonna close it formally?
I'm gonna formally close it. Maybe.
Okay.
Hey, why don't you take us out?
No, I'm not doing that. I can't do that. No. Well, hey, I'll take us out.
First,
I love these, and I hope you know just how powerful these sessions are for folks that listen, because I have folks that have now listened to subsequent episodes, and I think you're providing a great service for probably more than you give yourself credit for, or maybe even you're aware. So
thank you.
I think this is invaluable if it helps one person. I know that you believe that down to your core.
Yeah.
And, for those that haven't worked with Laura, I would encourage you to give her a shot at Shine Consulting. That's a shout out.
Oh, I like this.
Right?
Yeah.
And for those that are contemplating coming on your webcast, it's one of the most enjoyable experiences. So I would encourage any leader that's looking to maybe share their journey with you. It's a really fun time. So thank you for affording us that opportunity.
Nice.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shine bright, everyone.